Right, well, I'll start with the introductions. My name is Justin Adams. I work for the NSUWT in the recruitment team, so we do a lot of the work regarding supporting new teachers and student teachers. So this webinar today is for student teachers and also those who have recently qualified, so early career teachers or newly qualified teachers, probation teachers or beginner teachers, depending where in the UK you are. The webinar is being recorded and eventually there'll be a copy of it on our website, which will notify you about at the time. I can't see or hear you, so don't worry, you can feel free to sit there and munch your pre-dinner snacks or even your dinner and drink. I know you've probably had long days and looking forward to a little bit of a relaxing evening and hopefully an informative start to the evening. We'll send you all, excuse me, a certificate to confirm you've attended and also a copy of the presentation, probably either tomorrow or Friday, depending on the capacity of the team. But keep an eye open for that. And also, you should have had an email in the last day or two to inform you about our remaining webinars taking place this October. Those of you who are new teachers, so those of you who aren't student teachers at the moment, we have a special event just for you taking place in November. I believe it's, I've forgotten the date, but we'll email you about it. It's on a Saturday in November, and it's a day of webinars taking place. There'll be things like behaviour management, time management, that's very important, especially when you're just starting out in your career. And also it starts off with panel. Anyway, enough of that. What we're here for today is a look at how you can stay safe online. You're entering a profession where there are additional expectations placed on you. So teachers have to adhere to something called the teacher standards, which those of you who are students may have already covered. Those of you who are new teachers will already probably be aware of them. There's information about the teacher standards on our website, and they'll also be covered in our induction presentations that we offer. But essentially, it places additional responsibilities on teachers, and some of that does cross over into your personal life, so how you present yourself in public, essentially. We did a lot of campaigning when the teacher standards were being created and negotiated. To try and prevent them being too onerous, because initially the proposals were much more severe than they are now. So we're going to look at that, how you can stay safe online in a sort of personal and professional capacity and keep the balance. So here we can start the presentation for you. Just a little bit of fun to start with. If you just pop in the chat, roughly what percentage of these you recognise as they pop up? Does anyone know all of them? No? 70-ish%, maybe a quarter. Okay, well, we'll 50%. Actually, that's not bad. We'll start in the top left. YGM, you get me. LOL, I think most of us know is laugh out loud. I still occasionally hear stories of people's parents or grandparents who think it means lots of love. I had a colleague who used to sign off all of their emails with that, which was, I had to have a conversation with her to explain that was not what it didn't mean what she thought it meant. PAW, this is probably less used now, and it could be swapped with POS. It's parents are watching or parent over shoulder. It's less common, but you might occasionally see it in a people who even do the Boston chat. NP, no problem. OMG is oh my god. IKR, I know, right? TBH, to be honest. WTF, I'm probably best not to say, but if you don't know, ask a trusted friend. IMO, in my opinion. DM, Depends on the platform. It can be doesn't matter or direct message. BBZ, babes. ICYMI, in case you missed it. HMU, hit me up. BBA, can't be asked. BTW, by the way. NSFW, not safe for work. If you happen to see that in an email subject field and it's sent to your work email address, don't open it. You might see it on Twitter sometimes if people are sharing risque content, they put that in there. But if you're on Twitter, you can already see the tweets. So it's a bit redundant in this case. So that was just a little bit of a fun. I've already talked a little bit about what we're going to cover, but we'll look at the common issues that affect teachers when they're using technology. And this is it's evolving really, because technology is evolving and the way we use it changes. If you look at the start of the pandemic, we saw a distinct change in the nature of inquiries coming in, because there were, as teachers were forced to do remote learning and either use new platforms or use technology they were already familiar with in a different way, such as WhatsApp. Suddenly people had work WhatsApp groups that weren't just their work friends. It might be the senior leadership team or a department. And we had people who had accidentally posted something not terribly complimentary about the senior leadership colleague in the senior leadership chat. That happened quite a lot. But we have nearly 300,000 members who, as you might imagine, occasionally people do make mistakes, and that's what we're here for, to help and advise. So we'll look at how you can use it safely and give you some tips to try and keep yourself safe, or as safe as possible and minimize risks. When problems do occur, we're here to help, and we'll look at a bit at the kind of support we can provide you with. The main platforms, the size of these icons roughly coincides with how often or the amount of use they have. So this one in the top left, I assume most people know, is YouTube. This one there, then we've got Pinterest. The Flame, I won't risk embarrassing anyone by asking me what that is, but that's Tinder. Other dating apps are available. WhatsApp, I've already talked about, that's the green phone. Then we have Snapchat, underneath that, Twitter, TikTok, that's had an explosion, hasn't it, in the last probably couple of years. Their involvement in sponsoring very popular TV shows, and it's really taken off. Does anyone know what the blue and pink dot in a circle is? No? That's Flickr. We also have the in the blue square is LinkedIn. You've got Instagram underneath and Facebook, and then Facebook Messenger. Or I think it might just be called Messenger now. Does anyone know what LinkedIn is? Again, pop it in the chat if you do. If not, we'll come back to that in a little bit, because it is essentially a sort of more basic version of Facebook, but for a professional capacity, exactly, professional profiles. So you create a profile with a very professional picture of you, with a picture of your choosing, and talk about your qualifications, your experiences, and it's a way for professionals to sort of network. In teaching, I suppose it's probably less likely you might find a job there, although again, LinkedIn is constantly expanding and changing the way it's used. But some people do find they get headhunted through LinkedIn, but it's a good way to network. You might find other head teachers on there. I've got a LinkedIn profile which I set up for purely for a professional reason, because I needed to contact someone. And over the years of having it, I keep getting notifications that certain people in education have linked with me. Not that I actually look on LinkedIn, but I get the email notifications telling me that they have. So it can be quite a useful thing to have in terms of building professional networks. Right. The issues facing teachers. Pupils and parents finding you. Have any of you already experienced that? You don't have to go into details, but it might be something you've come across. Employers, colleagues finding you. I can pretty much guarantee that most employers or prospective employers will search for candidates on social media. Either once they've been successful, colleagues might do it. Once they know who's coming, they might think, oh, I want to know who this person is coming to my school. They'll look for you on social media. So we need to think about what our professional and personal presence is online. What are other people going to see once they look for us? Because people will do this. I'm sure you've probably done it yourselves with various people you might have seen online, or you might have come across. Even in social groups, you might meet someone and think, oh, got on really well, let's connect on social media. So your digital footprint is very important in that sense. Cyberbullying of teachers, unfortunately, does happen. When it comes to things like fake profiles, we've had cases in the past where pupils have waited, when a teacher has left a school, pupils have set up a fake Facebook profile, it tends to be, or sometimes Instagram, in that person's name, and then try to friend other teachers within the school. So just be vigilant. If anything comes up that you think is a little bit odd, do check with the person whose profile it is, if you can contact them in another way, just to check that everything is legitimate. There was a really awful story we had where a teacher had arranged a date on Tinder and waited in a bar, and nobody turned up. And later found out that some pupils in the school had set up a fake Tinder profile and essentially catfished him into this date. And he was incredibly embarrassed by the whole situation, didn't know how to approach it because he didn't necessarily want his colleagues to know that he'd been on Tinder, not that there's anything wrong with it, but it was just a very embarrassing situation for him, and he didn't know how to approach it, so he came to us. And I'll be honest, it's not the only case. We've had a few similar cases like that, where people have had awkward and uncomfortable online experiences. The derogatory comments, who do you think makes the derogatory comments about teachers on social media? Would you say it's probably mostly parents or pupils? In our experience, it's mostly parents. We regularly conduct surveys. We're a member-led trade union, so we conduct surveys of our members to find out what the current issues are, things that are affecting them, things that are important. And we did a specific survey about people's online experiences. And more than 60% of the respondents said they'd seen negative comments posted about themselves online by a parent. The vast majority of that was on Facebook, actually it was the vast majority, and then a small amount was on Instagram as well, and a little bit on Twitter. But if you think about pre-social media, parents would sometimes meet at the school gate, maybe have a moan about what's happening in their lives, perhaps talk about certain teachers in the school. They'd go home and it would stop. But with social media, that contact is so much more easier to maintain. And people sometimes feed off each other, and there is spiral, and it becomes a bit of a pile-on. And they forget, well, maybe they don't forget, maybe they're fully aware, but that often these conversations are fully public. Certainly if it's on Facebook, they often are, and that information can get back to the people concerned. It can be incredibly hurtful. With WhatsApp conversations, we've had examples where a parent who has been in a WhatsApp group has felt very uncomfortable with the information that, with the conversation that's taken place, and they themselves have taken screenshots and shared it with the head teacher in the school, or shared it with the teacher concerned, because they felt that things were getting out of control. So it is a very real problem, and I'll say our survey of our members showed that a significant number of members were very concerned about it. We'll come back to what you can do about these things in a bit. I don't want you to feel that we're just telling you all the problems and going to leave you hanging. Right, so I've talked about our survey. The members that have seen comments on social media by parents and pupils. What I didn't mention is that most of the comments are left unreported. Almost 80% of the respondents didn't report the comments, and the main reason for that was that they felt that nothing would be done about it, or nothing could be done about it. Perhaps 10 years ago, when we first started talking about this with schools, that was the case. The vast majority of schools were kind of unprepared, and there wasn't enough guidance, certainly coming from the government or educational authorities, about how to deal with this. And a lot of head teachers just didn't know how to do it, so they wouldn't do it, or they would try not to. Things have improved a lot since then, and all schools now are required to have an acceptable use or an acceptable use policy, which will cover not only how you should use social media, but it will also look at what to do when there's a problem. So there'll be bullying and harassment might be part of that, or it will probably be a separate policy on its own, which will go through all the ways that inappropriate behaviour by parents will be dealt with. And that's not just face-to-face confrontations, that includes online work. And in most cases, the head teacher will call those parents in and have a stern word with them and tell them it's not appropriate, and that behaviour isn't appropriate. So please don't suffer in silence if you are unfortunate enough to experience any sort of negative online interactions, or to be informed that it's taking place. You don't even have to witness them. Please do raise that, because the last thing you want is for you to suffer in silence, and your head teachers now should be more on board with that. We've been campaigning for a long time to improve the statutory requirements on schools, and that includes things like keeping teachers' names out of the press when a complaint's been made, certainly in the initial stages of an investigation, because you'll often see headlines saying the teacher has been accused of X, Y, and Z, or it's. I mean, there was a story again from going back more than 10 years now, but it was a head teacher in London, and the picture, so the article was very prominent in, I think it was the Sun of the Daily Mail, and the picture was of this head teacher on holiday in a low-cut top with a cocktail, looking very tanned, and the headline was "Head Teacher Caught Bragging About Boob Job" on Facebook. And parents had seen this, and it got shared, and then it got picked up by a national newspaper and was a very prominent story. Now, that poor woman, I don't know what the fallout was. She wasn't one of our members, but you can imagine how horrific that must have been, to be splashed all over the national newspapers and having to face parents who have seen this article and the pictures. And I think nowadays we're a lot more wiser about privacy settings, but certainly at that time, perhaps she was a little naive or unprepared, and it was public, and so the story got out. Having said that, sometimes things still, even if you're careful and you have your privacy settings at the correct level, all it takes is for the wrong person to have access to it, and they can share it. We had an unfortunate case of someone who was off work with work-related stress, and as part of their sort of recovery, they were doing a lot of recreation activities, which included going to the theatre, and they were checking in on Facebook when they were doing this. And some of their colleagues, they only had a few colleagues as friends on Facebook, and some of their colleagues took exception to that. And unfortunately printed off and gave it to their teacher, and that they tried to use that against them as part of the capability procedure. And again, that's not uncommon, that does unfortunately happen. So here's a very quick social media quiz that let me share the poll. Right. I'll give you, hopefully you can all see this poll, and I'll give you a minute or so to answer the questions. The first question is, should teachers have parents as friends on Facebook? The second one is, should you be able to use Twitter on a residential trip? The third question, is it all right to take photos of your class on your own mobile phone? Well, it says your mobile phone, but it's your personal mobile phone. And then fourth, is it okay to use Instagram while you're off work ill? Number 5, can your employer sack you for something you post on Facebook? Has everyone voted? I'm going to close it. Let's give you 10 more seconds. And really still well done. Okay, let's end that poll. Right. The first question, should teachers have posted friends on Facebook? 100% said no, well done. That's very interesting. Usually we have at least 1 or 2 people who put not sure. And the reason for that would be if you happen to have been friends with a parent of a child outside of school, so before they had children or before their children were age to be in class, that tends to happen more in rural areas where people are teaching in a small community that they've lived in for most of their life, or they live in that small community before they become a teacher. And in those circumstances, I'm assuming that probably doesn't apply to any of you, because you all answered no, but if it does apply to you, our advice would be check your school's policy, because your school might have a very clear policy that explicitly says you cannot be friends with parents, in which case you need to have a conversation with that friend and say, while I'm teaching your child, I can't be friends with you on whatever social network it might be. But you can still be real life friends outside of school. You just have to be careful with the social media presence. Or the school might not have a policy and you just have to make a decision yourself about whether you feel comfortable with that. Again, it comes down to, or it might come down to, checking your settings to make sure that you have the right sort of privacy settings. So that could be something like making sure friends of friends can't see it, only your friends can, because there is an option to have friends of friends allowed to know things. Or setting up groups so that certain items are only shared with specific people. But it's a bit of a judgment call. But for the vast majority of cases, you are absolutely right, and we would say no. So if it is, I don't know, Adele's mom tries to friend you on Facebook, then and she's just a child that you teach and you have no other reason to be friends, definitely no. Using Twitter on a residential trip, this one's interesting, more split. Half of you said yes, a quarter said no, and another quarter said not sure. Your school might say to you that please do use Twitter or another social media platform to keep parents updated of the progress on a residential trip. So that might be a closed group on some kind of social network that you then at the end of the day post a little update or photos that someone's child has gone rock climbing today or whatever it is. And in that case, that's okay as long as you're given specific time to do that. But if it's a personal Twitter account, just think about the appropriateness of when you're doing it. Hopefully on a residential trip, you will have some downtime during the day. So it might be when you're asleep, or hopefully it'll be scheduled sometime before that when you have a shift pattern in place where some colleagues will cover and you get an hour off to go and read quietly in the corner, or do whatever it is that you want to do. And in that scenario, yes, that's fine. You should be able to use it. But just be mindful about the timing of it. So if you're supposed to be looking after some children who are on a nature trip exploring some bushes, and one of the kids is being mauled by a bear while you're tweeting a photo of a nice view, that's obviously going to be a problem. So again, think about the appropriateness. Taking photos of a class on your own mobile phone. Our advice is definitely not. So one of the reasons for that is it's an extra opening really for mistakes and accusations. Technology wants to connect. You know, it might be a case that you take photos on your phone and it uploads to your cloud. And if you've got an Apple and you've got an iPad cloud and Apple Mac at home, you might find that you've taken that photo and it's automatically uploaded and it's on all of those devices, and suddenly you're having to delete it from multiple machines. If you're not that au with technology, then it might be harder than you think to delete. I had an issue quite a few years ago now with a new mobile phone, and I hadn't realized that photos are being saved on my cloud, and I was deleting them from the album on my phone. And they kept reappearing, and it was really frustrating. I was really despairing over this because it was using up memory on my phone, and I just couldn't figure it out. And a quick Google search revealed why. And then I had to try and figure out how to access my cloud that I couldn't remember setting up and didn't know the password for. And it was just a little bit frustrating. I'm a bit more on top of things now because we're more familiar with clouds. But again, the technology wants to connect. So just be careful, think about that if you're taking photos. We've had schools with policies that say they encourage you to use your mobile phone, but you have to delete the picture before you leave the school premises. Now, if you are the last person working in school at night and there's nobody else there, what are you supposed to do? Leave your phone at school and supervise until someone's available the next day? So the technology itself is quite cheap nowadays. Schools can buy digital cameras or mobile phones relatively cheaply. So there's no need really why you should have to use your own camera. Taking pictures of people's work, absolutely fine. But pupils themselves, just we would advise against it. The fourth question about using Instagram while you're off work here, we kind of touched on this when with the Facebook story I told you before, and the person who was off work sick and going to the theatre. On this, 3/4 of you said yes, and the rest was split between no and not sure. Again, I suppose it depends what you're off work, but if you have got a broken leg and you're not fit enough to be in work, and you're at home putting things on Instagram or Twitter or whatever, tweeting about the latest episode of Bake Off, and then friends hate you because you tweeted a spoiler about who went home the night before, then fair enough. But if you are off work sick with something that, say, the flu, and your friends can see you tweeting or putting things on Instagram about the things you've been watching that day, or that you've been doing lots of baking, that's quite possibly going to get their backs up. Imagine if one of your colleagues is covering your class or picking up some of your additional work and you're sick, and they see you having a lovely, well, they perceive you as having a nice time at home. So just think about how other people will perceive what you're posting online. Again, I would hope in the majority of cases it wouldn't be a problem, but just try and think about how other people might react to it. You might be surprised, because something that seems very reasonable to you may not seem reasonable to other people who don't know the full picture. The fifth question, can you employ a SACD for something you post on Facebook? And this is the same response rate as one before. 3/4 said yes, and the others were split between no and not sure. And unfortunately, they absolutely can. The teacher standards that I mentioned at the beginning of this session, like they place additional responsibilities on teachers anyway. But even without that, if you posted something truly inappropriate on social media, then it could result in you losing your job. With teaching, you're fortunate enough to have a formal process. There are a number of formal processes, but particularly when it comes to any form of disciplinary action, there has to be a formal process that we go through before a teacher can be sacked. So it might be that if something grossly inappropriate is posted online, that the teacher is suspended immediately, and then there's an investigation and disciplinary hearing, which might be quite quick if it was something illegal that's posted online. So inappropriate images of minors, for example. But the formal process is there to make sure that you're treated fairly. If anything like this happens, you need to contact us immediately. I'm not talking about inappropriate images, but anything. If any allegations are made against you for putting something online or anything else, do contact us. So something a little bit more lighthearted, when hashtags go wrong. You may remember some of these. The first one is actually, it's not lighthearted, this is awful, but I don't know if you remember a few years ago when one of the Christian Bale Batman films was premiering, and there was a shooting at a screening in a cinema in America in a town called Aurora, and the hashtag Aurora was trending on Twitter because people were obviously shocked and horrified by what had happened. And unfortunately, there was a fashion company that had a dress called Aurora that I think had been worn by Kim Kardashian. It was one of the Kardashians. They saw it was trending and decided to cash in on it by promoting their dress. They were annihilated online, and I don't think that company exists anymore, but you can Google the story if you want to read more. Hobbit, that was to promote the Hobbit film, and they created the hashtag for each country, whether with the international country code at the end, and CH was unfortunately added onto the end of Hobbit, created slightly different meaning, and CH I think is Switzerland. I think it's Switzerland. And then this, again, unfortunate one, now that Cher is dead, but it was now Thatcher is dead. I don't know why anyone would create that hashtag. That's quite an odd hashtag. But it was Margaret Thatcher, but Americans read it as Cher, the famous singer icon. So again, things don't always translate around the world. So be careful if you're creating hashtags. Do it on the bus. That was a Canadian bus company trying to get customers, potential customers, to share ideas of why the bus is the best way to commute to work and what you could do on the bus. As you can imagine, people with filthy minds hijacked that. But it still made the news over there, and it worked as far as a publicity stunt, but not quite in the way that they intended. So, some practical tips now. Some of this will be summarizing things we've talked about already. Secure your privacy settings on all online profiles. Sometimes when we get software updates for particular apps, they undo things that we put in place before. Facebook did this years ago. Excuse me. I've always had, well, I don't have Facebook profile anymore, but I'd always been very careful with it. And quite a few years ago, Facebook did an update which reset everyone's security settings to a baseline, which essentially was that it was open. And I was sort of talking to someone that I didn't know about, saying, oh yeah, my Facebook's really fine. And they looked it up and it wasn't, it was completely open. So it was a lesson for me about being careful. So once you've put the settings in place, do go back and check them occasionally to make sure they are where you set them to be. And another thing that people sometimes do is, this is sort of going off a little bit on tangent with that, but people sometimes will use a pseudonym online, so they might teach under one name and have a different name for their social media presence. Usually they teach, quite often you'll find it's women who are married might keep their maiden name for teaching. But other people do it as well, not just people who are married. If you do that, be mindful that again, it's that thing about the technology wanting to connect. So your username might be unique to that account, but if it's linked to an email address that you use for everything else or a phone number you use for everything else, it will still, some platforms will still recognize that and try and connect you, especially as Facebook finds out more, excuse me, more apps and technology. So just be mindful that you might think that you're being covert online, but that might not necessarily be the case if you're using other email addresses. So if you want to be able to tweet something securely, I know certainly on my Twitter feed there are a lot of teachers who don't use their real names or their profile pictures on there so that they can tweet generally about education or that they've had a bad day. So I would advise not to be too much about how much you hate your job on social media. Don't do that. So they are using a different name. I don't know them, so I don't know how easily traceable that those are. But if you do decide to do that, just be mindful. Google yourself. If you haven't done it already, please do Google yourself and use certain tags after your name. So where you live or the name of an employer or something associated with it. If you play hockey, the name of hockey or various things like that, just to see what comes up. You can control what you put online, but you have limited control over what other people put online. And it might be that if you were a witness in a court case, that if you Google your name and an association, like if it was an employment tribunal, Google your name and the name of the employer, your name will pop up in the paperwork in Google. So just have a look and see what comes up. If you find anything worrying, there are a couple of things you can do to deal with it, and we'll come to that. Well, actually, no, I'll talk about it now. If it's something that is just not that bad, but it's not the first impression you want to give, you can try and bury things on Google. So if you push them further down the search, people rarely get to the bottom of the first page of search results, let alone the second page. So if you actually increase your online presence, but in a more controlled and positive or neutral way, it can be beneficial. So LinkedIn tends to come up quite high. Instagram, Flickr also comes up. So if you set up a Flickr account and just post a few pictures of pretty autumn trees or a mushroom or other things, or your dinner, then that's fairly harmless stuff, and it might push the other things that you don't want to be seen a bit further down the search results. If there's something really terrible, pictures of you a little worse for wear at a celebration of some sort, then you can either ask the person who posted them to take them off. You can untag yourself, obviously that's the first step. If you're still in touch with the person that want to ask them to take it off, sometimes you can contact the site administrator and ask them to remove it. And in a worst case situation, you can ask us if we can provide any assistance, because we've been building up contacts over a period of time as social networks evolve. So we do have contacts at places like YouTube. Sometimes we have trouble getting things removed, but by building up these contacts with them, it gives us a better opportunity to protect our members. Keeping your personal contact details private. If the school asks you to give your phone number to a parent, I would strongly advise you not to. You probably can imagine what it's like. Once someone gets your phone number, you are at their beck and call, at their control, so they can contact you at any time. And I know, again, during lockdown, the first lockdown in particular, a lot of teachers felt pressured into sharing their personal contact details with parents, but our position is that that's inappropriate, because you really don't want that. You have enough work to do without having to field calls from angry parents, or you might not even be angry, they might just be really nice, but sometimes that's worse because they're the hardest people to tell them to go away politely. So don't share those details with people's parents. Using personal equipment for work and vice versa, again, I would encourage you to keep it separate as far as possible. If you're at university, that's fine, that's not a problem, because that's your university work on your computer. But if it's an employment situation and you're using your employer's laptop, that is their property and they have the right to access any information on that laptop. So if you have been posting messages to your secret teacher account, sort of whistleblowing what's happening under the surface of a particular academy trust, and they've done it on your work computer and they have to take that in for some repairs, and they find that, that's your problem. And on a sort of lower threat level, if you are using YouTube as a teaching aid and you've been using your work computer to access your own personal YouTube account, you could potentially share something that might not be appropriate for kids. It might not be terribly inappropriate, but it might not be something you want them to see, because it'll show the recommendations for you in your videos you subscribe to. You might not want them to know that you follow, I don't know, a particular pop group, or that you're a K-pop fan, or whatever else it might be, or that you watch lots of horror films or horror clips on there. Just so, as far as possible, try to keep it separate. So if you are doing things like using YouTube or the internet on your work computer, keep it to work stuff and do your personal stuff on your own computer. It's become a bit easier now since pretty much everyone has a smartphone, and I know for a lot of people that's their primary access to the internet. So things have become a little bit easier in that sense. We don't all need access to laptops for our personal life. Plus, I suppose that depends what you're doing online. Do any of you have your own YouTube channels? If you do, that's fine. You're entitled to do that in your personal life. But I would advise you again to check the school policy on acceptable use, or user policy, or whatever similar policy they have, because Fiona said yes, but never properly posted to it. If you do broadcast videos, if any of you do, just be mindful of the content, and again, how public that is. So again, if you use a pseudonym and a separate email account so it can't be traced back to you. We have had cases of people being denied jobs, well, not denied jobs, but told they have to choose between their YouTube channel or the job that they've been offered, because it's been found out that they have a YouTube video. They've told the potential employer that they have it, or it's been discovered after they've been offered the job. And in some cases, job offers can be withdrawn as a result of that. In fact, there was a case again a few years ago with someone who had a YouTube channel giving advice to young people, to teenagers, and their head teacher felt that it wasn't appropriate, and with their teaching job, that the two things didn't really fit very well together, because it didn't follow the same ethos as a school. It wasn't inappropriate content in the wider societal terms, but the head teacher just felt that it wasn't really right for their school, and the person was given a choice, and they chose their YouTube channel over the job. And it was an initial job offer that hadn't actually started work, so the employer can do that. So again, just be mindful. But Fiona, I'm sure you'll be fine with that. There's nothing to say about. We've sort of covered this more generally, but it's so important. Don't post information about yourself publicly that you wouldn't want employers, colleagues, pupils, and parents to find. Information that we put online, we can, in most cases, go back and remove it if we need to. But all it takes is for one person to see that and screenshot it, and then it's out of our control. So again, just something to think about. You're intelligent people, you're professionals, you know. It's unlikely that you'll do anything, but we all make mistakes. It's easily done, especially, I don't know, people who like to have a few drinks or get a bit carried away on a night out, and you're posting funny pictures, and then the next day you wake up and think, oh, I didn't post that. Then you have to quickly go online and delete it. You know, it happens. So if you have a problem, take a screen grab, record dates, times, witnesses. People often think that they don't need to write some of this information down whenever there's an incident. They'll think, oh, well, I'll remember it. But sometimes it can take a few weeks for things to start moving. And it's really important to have as accurate a record as possible. So if somebody sends you something that is inappropriate, it might be explicit content, in which case be careful if you're taking a screen grab, particularly if it's a minor. We do occasionally have incidents where pupils will send graphic photos to teachers, in which case don't take a screen grab. You need to inform the head teacher immediately and delete the picture. But you need to inform the head teacher that this has happened and write down all the details of it, but you shouldn't be sending that picture to anyone or taking a screenshot of it. But for anything that is not of that nature, then by all means take a screenshot. If anyone was around when it happened or anyone else was online that saw it, that saw it, take a note of all their details as well. Speak to senior management. There might be a person in school who's designated to deal with online related incidents or problems with parents. So it might be that you speak to them, it might be someone else in senior leadership in school, or it might be directly to the teacher. But whatever happens, do raise your concerns. On there it talks about the offending comment / site. Have any of you heard of Rate My Teacher? Fortunately, it's more popular in the United States than it is here, and I would say probably don't look at it. But if it ever does come up, it's essentially what it sounds like. It's a website that was set up by people to go on and rate their teachers. So you can go on and search by school, find a teacher, or you can even set up a school and put the teacher's name in, and then people rate them. Now, I have had a look at this, and quite surprisingly, there are more positive comments than there are negative. But occasionally it does get hijacked, and it might be something like, Mr. Adams' math lesson was kind of boring and I really hated the tie that he wore. Well, that's not so bad. But if it's something really defamatory and offensive or threatening, then Rate My Teacher will take it down. We've had quite a lot of back and forth arguing with Rate My Teacher, but they argue that their express purpose is to rate teachers. So as long as it's something like the lesson was boring and you've got that tie, then they'll leave it up there. But if it is something more sinister or threatening, then they will remove it. Unfortunately, the website's based in the USA, so our legal avenue is a little bit more limited. But nevertheless, we have that relationship with them, and things can be removed. Contact us for advice. We are here for you. I said before that we're member-led. We have an advice line, which is available either on the phone or by email. So contact them for confidential advice. They will never take any action unless you tell them to. So it might be that you just want to discuss a scenario or a situation with them, but they'll take your name and details and record it on a file in case there is ever a need to escalate it. So situations sometimes might start off seeming as fairly small, and sometimes they can develop a bit later on. Contacting the administrators of a website to remove content. I've mentioned that with Rate My Teacher, and we've had some success with YouTube as well. But again, similarly with other platforms, things to be removed. It's becoming easier to report content that is inappropriate. You see buttons for reporting on, I think, most social media platforms. Some of them are better than others at dealing with it. They've been improving in certainly, I think, in the last year. Things have got a bit better after some rather horrific off social media incidents happened. So things have improved somewhat in that sense. We will take legal action where necessary. We have a whole host of caseworkers and legal experts working at NHWT. We have our legal and casework department, and where necessary, if we need additional support, we will engage a legal firm called Thompson's. We work very closely with them. So we're not averse to taking legal action. Obviously, we would aim to resolve any problems at the lowest possible level rather than escalating, but we by no means do we shy away from any kind of fight. We are here to protect you as best we can. So his email address I mentioned before, advice@mail.nhwt.org.uk. The email and phone number are on most of our communications that we send out. We've got our website address there. Oh, sorry, I should say the advice line that is primarily for members in England, but those of you in Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland have a separate email address. But if you email that one, we'll pass it on to the relevant people because we have national offices in each of the nations to do with it. So I do apologise, I missed that off this slide. We have a part of our website, a student hub set up, which, although it's called the Student Hub, it's actually for new teachers as well. There's a lot of resources for both students and new teachers, but it was just a bit cumbersome to call it Student and New Teacher Hub. Maybe one day we'll come up with a better or more appropriate name for it, but for now, it's the Student Hub. You can link to it through there, or you can go on the website and just search Student Hub. In fact, I think it's on the first page of our website. But yes, there's a lot of information on there, as I say. Look out for our emails for our future webinars. We traditionally, pre-pandemic, we had 3 periods of face-to-face webinars for newly qualified teachers. That was before they were career teachers. So in the summer, we would have a series of face-to-face seminars all around the UK. We have a follow-up in November and then another follow-up towards the end of June. At the moment, all of our events are online, but we still keep to that timetable for our main consultation webinars. So the webinars are an opportunity for you to attend CPD sessions, but also for you to ask us questions and engage with us. At the face-to-face events, quite often I'd be approached by members who had come to the conference, and they would just say, "Oh, I had this problem. I wasn't sure whether it was worth mentioning it." And it might be something like they were really struggling with their induction and they thought they were going to fail, and they weren't sure whether to mention it, but they thought they would while they were there. And that is absolutely something we would help with. And then I might see them at a future event and they'd say, "Oh, I spoke to the caseworker, they were really good, and I'm really happy now I do in schools," or they provide the extra support that they need, whatever it might be. But as new teachers, you have some very important rights that give you additional support. So you have your PPA time plus an extra 10% non-contact time on top of that as part of your induction time. And then next year you'll have your 10% PPA time and 5% non-contact time for your ECT time, I suppose it's called now. But there's a lot more in addition to that. So it doesn't have to be necessarily about anything to do with online, but anything about your career that you're unsure of, please do contact us for advice and support. Sorry, I know I've talked a lot. Is there anything anyone wanted to ask? Oh, there's questions in Q&A. What do you advise when a pupil takes photos of another people on their mobile during class? I've already had this. I tried to get them to leave it in front of me, but don't know whether they actually did. Well, yes, that's true. I would, in the first instance, check what the school policy is on mobile phones in the class. They should have a bit, well, there will be a behaviour management policy. Now, how good and how detailed that is obviously varies from school to school. I would check to see whether they have a clear sort of pathway for how to respond and how to deal with that and how to escalate it. But once you've asked them to delete it, I would hope that there would still be a method for reporting that. In that, even though you've hopefully dealt with it in a satisfactory way, which it sounds like you did, that I would hope in most schools there's a way to still record that somewhere, so that it can potentially be followed up later on. Some schools don't allow mobile phones in the classroom, so there might be some other avenue that needs to be pursued along those lines, some kind of punishment, or perhaps talking to the parents about it. That possibly depends on the age of the child concerned. But yes, check your behaviour policy to see if there's anything clear in there that specifies exactly what you should do. But I think we did the right thing, and I would perhaps mention it to someone in senior leadership, or it might be that you just register it with the office or someone who's in charge of safeguarding. But again, that depends on the school. I would say perhaps talk to the safeguarding lead, or whatever the designated person is, about it, to see if they think any further action needs to be taken. Any other questions? I'm sorry, Fiona, I realised you posted that half an hour ago. You're welcome, Mahmood. If there are no other questions, then I will let you go and have your evenings, whatever's left of your evenings. But thank you very much for joining us, and I hope one day to see you all face to face at one of our events, and maybe even at one of our other webinars. But take care, everyone. Thank you very much, and like I said, please do contact us if you have any questions. Thank you. Take care, everyone.